Why don't we go ahead and get started? Right. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Green Room, where we speak to FinTech entrepreneurs and leaders in Southeast Asia about their careers and industry insights. I'm your host, Amrita Vir. We are supported by Oxygen, Apex's webinar platform, and Broncos. Big thank you to them. Today's episode is all about green finance, which is especially exciting since last Thursday, April 22nd, was Earth Day. Today's webinar is also a follow-up to the recent Future of Finance is Green webinar, also supported by Oxygen, and we'll share the links in the chat and a follow-up email. Today, we are speaking with Dave Rouse, who's also one of the speakers from the Future of Finance is Green webinar, about his work in green finance, specifically carbon offsets. So please send your questions in the Q&A box. I'll be keeping an eye on it during the session. But before we talk to Dave and talk about green finance, let me turn it over to Todd Schweitzer, CEO and founder of our sponsor Broncos, to talk a little bit about Apex and its FinTech community. Todd, over to you.
Thanks, Amrita, and hello, everyone. Good day, and thanks for joining. If we can just make the slides full screen, I'll just give a quick overview about Apex. So, yeah, as Amrita said, my name is Todd Schweitzer. I'm the CEO and co-founder of Broncos. We're an open API technology company, and we're also a technology partner for Apex, which is sponsoring the Green Room series. So just wanted to give a couple minutes on what this is all about. So Apex is really a platform for connecting financial institutions and fintechs, and increasingly actually is focused on green finance solutions. But first and foremost, it's a marketplace and a way for discovery, both for financial institutions to discover various new fintech solutions, as well as for fintechs to make themselves known and actually provide demos and technical prototypes on the Apex sandbox. It's also a portal for grant and investment schemes, of which several are still ongoing. And there is a hackathon as a service infrastructure, which is really cool. Most recently, NPCI, which is the large payments administrator in India, has been running and is completing a hackathon countrywide. And so it's basically, this is promoted by, can I go to the next slide? So promoted by the ASEAN Bankers Association, the IFC, and the MAS in Singapore, and there's a number of large and small technology companies that are involved in making Apex a success. Next slide. So there's a growing network of partners as well. So Apex is connected more and more to the FinTech industry communities and bankers associations around the region. So more recently, the FinTech Alliance in the Philippines, as well as the Indonesia FinTech Association, or AFTEC. And then I believe even just this week, there was signing of a couple new FinTech associations. So this is also a way for FinTech startups and financial technology companies generally to have a way to promote what they're doing, to connect with financial institutions, to provide a space for demo, to provide technical training for their own users, all through the Apex secure cloud environment. Next slide. And the recent announcement from Apex is that they are waiving any sort of membership fees if you are an earlier stage startup. So if you're funded Series B and below, your first year of membership on Apex is free, and that gives you a chance to set up a profile, show your prototypes, provide a testing environment for users, and overall just provide an easier way for your solutions to be found and for you to do fast prototyping with financial institutions. So part of what Apex does is building a community and demonstrating the value of connecting financial institutions, fintechs, and users, and increasingly green finance is part of that. So we're happy to promote the Apex Oxygen series and this webinar going on now. So thanks, Amrita, for hosting, and to Dave, looking forward to learning from you. Over to you guys.
Thank you, Todd. All right, now I am super excited to introduce our guest, Dave Rouse, co-founder and CEO of CarbonClick. Dave,
how are you
here today? Great. Thank you so much for joining us. So Dave, let's jump right in. I want to talk about you, but I also want all of us to get on the same page. I obviously know what FinTech is, financial technology, and I sort of know what green tech is, like saving the planet. But today we're talking about green FinTech or sustainable finance. What does that actually mean?
Well, what the name alludes to, it's the financial market which could extend from listed issuers, registered banks, licensed issuers, managers of investment schemes. And what it means is that any of the investment and financial work in that space actually doesn't just take into account returns and interest calculations and financial considerations. It actually takes into account the wider environmental impact of that financial investment or those financial transactions or that financial methodology. So it's getting towards this triple bottom line profitability and measurement and accounting standards.
Got it. So it's about taking a normal, any business, especially any financial business, and then applying kind of a green lens to it.
Absolutely, or expanding the scope on what you're measuring, and what you're reporting on to include wider considerations. So, you know, if an investment fund is investing in oil and the growth in oil prices as part of that, they may actually be part of the problem rather than part of the solution to climate change if they start reporting on the impact that's got by supporting that industry and investing in that industry, the impact that has on the wider environment versus investing in clean energy technologies where they could redeploy those funds. And they may not have quite the same financial returns, but by the time they add the green lens on it, and say, hang on, the total impact is going to be significantly better for the next generation than just growth in the value of our fund, that's something that they can actually report on. So our fund is performing at this level, plus it's having this environmental impact or having this positive environmental benefit. Yeah,
that's awesome. And so, you know, there are so many ways that you could go about, you know, saving the world and focusing on climate change. How did you decide that climate change, and especially green finance, is the problem that you wanted to focus on?
Well, I've been active as an investor and a philanthropist for quite maybe 5 or 6 years now. I had previously bought and sold businesses and applied triple bottom line profitability metrics to all of those businesses, and then took it up a level to invest in others and particularly try and help the startup space. And some common threads started appearing there, and one of those threads was around single-use plastics and the issue that that's having in our wider environment. And the other thread that was emerging, which I didn't understand until a few years ago, was our greenhouse gas emissions and greenhouse gas inventory. So I started digging a little deeper into this and realised that, you know, something that Obama said in his departing speech was, you know, we're the last generation, we're the first generation to feel the impact of climate change and the last generation to have the opportunity to do something about it. And that really resonated with me as well. So I started looking at how can we fix this problem on a macro scale. And that's where investment opportunities like CarbonClick came into things. How do we fix what's wrong with people not offsetting their carbon, reducing their footprint? How do we get everyday people as easily as possible to address this? And that comes through green finance. It comes through credit card reward schemes that reward green purchases. It comes through loyalty schemes that reward green activities and actually create offsets instead of another free product that you possibly don't need. So I figured this is a pretty good way to be able to influence the masses using some key influential and forward-thinking financial institutions.
Got it. So you came to CarbonClick as an investor, or?
Yeah, originally. So the team at CarbonClick was still working for an international airline when they'd pitched at an accelerator, a very young stage concept, and they were looking for pre-seed investment to prototype their idea. They'd built the carbon offsets calculator and module for this airline, and they had a whole lot of feedback from users that didn't trust carbon offsetting and didn't trust what the airlines were doing with that money. So they set about to fix that trust and transparency problem in offsetting. And that really resonated with me, because it seems like such a simple thing to fix, but it stops so many people from participating, that these are the barriers that can change the world. If we bulldoze these barriers and make it easy and trustworthy for people to participate, then we've solved a problem. And when we can solve a problem, that's when we can bring about change. So I'd approached it as an investor, and I totally fell in love with the team as they starting to prototype. They asked me would I come on board as a CEO and lead them from a commercial perspective, at least for the first few years. And I just took that opportunity with open arms, and so here I am, nearly 2 years in since we first registered the business.
Yeah, wow, that's amazing. That's amazing. What a cool opportunity as an investor to then be able to really get your hands dirty in the thing that you the impact that you're trying to make. That's awesome. Let's talk more about CarbonClick, because I think the company's vision is to be the offset button of choice for the global fintech market. Maybe you mentioned carbon offsets a few times. Let's dig into that. Can you explain how they work and really how they can impact climate change?
Yeah, absolutely. So carbon offsets can be one of two things. They can be a reduction of emissions, or they can be something that absorbs those emissions. So we call that sequestration. So reduction of emissions might be where you're sponsoring the replacement of a diesel power plant or generator for a town with a wind farm. Now that might be uneconomic or only mildly economic, but not enough to make the transition. Perhaps it's an area that has cheap coal, or an area that has cheap fuel available, so it doesn't make financial sense for them to make that switch. But you've got a price there which you can fund through carbon offsets. And sometimes that can be quite cheap, because they don't need much of a jump to make that project a feasible project with a 10-year payback. Sometimes it's a huge jump, but there might be wider social benefits as well, such as reduced lung cancer rates and things in some of these areas. So you look at not just the carbon component, but the wider social impact component as well. And then on the sequestration side of things, you can plant trees or seaweeds or other plant materials that actually absorb carbon from the atmosphere and sequester it. They store it in the woody root structure, and eventually that becomes a massive carbon underground. You can also have sustainable farming practices where the biomass is sequestered into the soil instead of soils being tilled more regularly. So there's basically the planting of trees and conserving of trees, or nurturing them to grow, is a really effective way to do this. And again, just like there are social benefits that you can add on in the sequestration side of things, in the tree planting basically, there are other benefits as well, like biodiversity. So we look at whether those credits actually preserve biodiversity, enhance biodiversity. We don't like monocrop, for example, because if you just go and plant a whole lot of pine, that's not a resilient crop to climate change. You look at the forest fires, all we're doing is creating another set of fuel for forest fires in 30 years' time. But if you have a diverse ecosystem that works naturally, that becomes more resilient to climate change. So we're looking at not only sequestration now, but we're looking at what's going to help the next generation and the next generation beyond this. So effectively you drive your car maybe 100 kilometres, and that might use 10 litres of fuel, that might emit 25 kilos of CO2 into the atmosphere. You can sequester that by, that's about what one tree will grow in 1 year. So all you're doing is purchasing the carbon credits or sponsoring one tree for 1 year of nurturing to offset the activity that you're having that actually causes the problem in the first place. We can't just offset either. We have to be reducing and focusing on minimising first, and then offsetting what can't be reduced as a secondary step.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, I was reading around the CarbonClick website, and it looks like you have offsetting projects in almost 40 countries all over the world. And you alluded to this a little bit, but how do you actually decide which offsetting projects you should be pursuing?
So there are three criteria. One is the carbon value. So for every dollar that we spend, how much carbon can we draw down from the atmosphere? And where is that dollar going to have the most impact? Because we all breathe from the same climate, from the same air. The air that you're breathing in Southeast Asia is the same air that circulates to New Zealand. It's the same air that circulates to the UK. So how can we draw down CO2 from this atmosphere and fix the problem at a macro level? Then we look at the secondary benefits, so social impact and biodiversity benefits that we bring to the whole planet. And then the third thing that we look at is localization, and how do we connect people to these projects. And this is why we have projects all over the world, is that in the areas that people are offsetting, it helps to build the connection to something they can relate to, something that's in their own backyard, something that they can feel that connection to, and perhaps in years to come, a forest that they can walk through.
Yeah, that's so interesting, because I think, we hold ourselves to certain standards when it comes to XYZ types of investments, but the offsetting space is still very new to most people. And so understanding really how you make those decisions affects how your offsetting customers make those decisions. That's super important. Let's talk a little bit about your customers. I think there are a lot of people that certainly who look like us, maybe millennials, Gen Z with disposable income, who are interested in CarbonClick's little green button. But is that true? Is that your only customer base? What do some of your customers look like? And do you think that they look a little bit different? Your customers in New Zealand look a little bit different than your customers maybe in other regions?
To a degree, you've stereotyped it fairly well. So there's a natural bell curve, and the spike is with the millennials, Gen Zs, that are now coming into a spend cycle where they're a little more affluent. They've got money, and they're talking with their wallets. So they're choosing companies, they're choosing banks, they're choosing investments that are more considered from an environmental perspective. And so our customers are actually the suppliers that have goods, services, or financial products to sell to these millennials through to Gen Zs. So our customers may still be the earlier generation who are actually still controlling financial institutions or loyalty schemes or credit cards or airlines or airports, for example. But ultimately, the end users of our products, or the end beneficiaries, are those millennials to Gen Zs who really care about what life looks like in 20 or 30 years' time.
Got it. And you think that those consumers are pretty much the same, whether it's in New Zealand or Southeast Asia or in the US or Europe? Is it pretty much that everybody fits that same profile?
It's very similar from an age demographic. I mean, that's not to say that, we've got some of our investors are in their late 70s and they really believe in this and they want to leave a legacy behind. And like me, they never understood climate change until very recently. They never thought it was an issue, and now they've realised and actually want to do something about it. And maybe they're board members sitting on a board that actually want to leave something positive behind as well. So there are a number of leaders in the older generations who are taking active steps here, and these are probably the most senior people that we're working with.
Yeah.
But what we see more than an age demographic is a geographical demographic spread. So, for example, in the western states of California, Washington State, western states of USA, like California, Washington State, Oregon, even up in Canada and in British Columbia, and in fact Canada-wide to a large degree as well, we see a real spike in activity. So this is where a lot of the fashionable surfy brands come from, and there's a real awareness, and I think some leaders that all generations look up to, like Arnold Schwarzenegger, for example, when he was mayor of California, with the environmental standards that he helped to build on. It reduced that barrier of greenies and hippies versus everybody else, and it brought everybody onto the same page, because even the most redneck kind of person that is just a petrol head or something, they listen.
I'm from Texas, not offended.
They listen to Arnold, and we all watched his movies when we were younger, and that's somebody that you can relate to. So you actually listen to and consider that, and he's had a massive impact on some of those generations that wouldn't have responded to a hippie standing up and saying, hey, you guys have got to do this. So I think it's some of these leaders that have changed tact and seen the error of the earlier ways and turned responsible, that we're very grateful. I'm very grateful that they've actually managed to get a significant amount of change. But coming back to my answer there, geographically would be the biggest spread, where we can see hotspots in the world where there is a big demand for change, and other places in the world where there is a rising rate of change. China, for example, is massively advancing. They're still probably 10 years behind where New Zealand is in the cycle of sustainability, but they're advancing much quicker than any other nation that I can see right now.
Got it. And how, I guess, since we're talking about it, how does Southeast Asia fit into that? I mean, obviously different parts of Southeast Asia, different countries look very different. I'm sitting in Singapore. What are your consumers? Are there differences in markets that you're seeing, or does all of Southeast Asia kind of operate the same way?
Yeah, very, very different from one market to another. Singapore is very mature. For example, in the sustainability and green finance space, you've got Monetary Authority of Singapore and Singapore FinTech festivals and all that, with a strong focus on this. So that, I would see a lot of leadership in this part of the world. But similarly, you've got in Thailand, for example, you've got both from the millennial generations who are looking at the smog problems that they had, 18 months ago, where they had to close schools, through to the leaders of those nations saying, hey, we've got to do something about this problem. Pollution and greenhouse gas emissions are kind of one and the same. If you fix one, you've fixed the other. So no matter what perspective they're approaching it from, there is a lot of leadership happening and a lot of generational pull for this to happen. But this is dictated by who's spending the money, right? And if generations of people are spending money in more sustainable ways, that forces every business to have to shift its focus to meet that demand. Otherwise, the businesses are just getting left behind. Yeah,
absolutely. I want to come back to the point around, maybe differences in Southeast Asia, especially Singapore, a little bit later, especially kind of on the policy side. But maybe I realized we didn't actually talk about what CarbonClick does. And, when you talk about your consumers, you talked about two types of consumers. One type of consumer being, like millennials, Gen Z, disposable income, anywhere in the world. But the other is, potentially political or business leaders. And that kind of goes along with the CarbonClick product. You have a B2B side and a B2C side. Can you tell us about, how each of those sides work?
Yeah, absolutely. So on a B2B side, a business might want to themselves reduce their carbon footprint and offset what can't be reduced. So that's pretty easy. It's a calculation. We work alongside their consultants, their sustainability consultants, and we provide really good quality, high value offsets to offset what can't be reduced. We also have programs in place. For example, in fact, one we're just about to release, which is for staff, so that it's called Climate Friendly Teams, and a business can actually subscribe their own teams to be able to log in, run a 60-second calculator. This is super simple, the world's fastest carbon impact calculator. And my grandma can use this. Every team member can understand what their footprint is, and they can track it over time. And the business has the option to sponsor offsets as well. So the business might sponsor 80% of the average person's carbon footprint, and everybody has the opportunity to reduce their footprint down to meet that. So the business has, through CarbonClick, the opportunity to help people reduce their impact, learn about their impact, and actually offset it so that they can be carbon neutral citizens as a result of working for that business. And this is something that particularly millennials are really attracted to. It's more value than 1 hour a month worth of pay rise for them to be able to say that they're carbon neutral as a result of working for this company. And it shows the company's actually taking measurable steps to help them reduce their footprint. But aside from that, the other area is on products. So every product has a carbon footprint, whether it's a bottle of wine, a pair of shoes, or a packet of vitamins, or a pair of jeans. So with that carbon footprint, we can actually offset at a product level so that a business can label that product climate friendly or climate positive. And we've had a brand called Constellation Brands. They own Corona beer, and a few others in the US trial this with a product called Round Theory wine. And this is a very low carbon wine product, and they double offset the footprint of it. So every time you're drinking a bottle, you're actually offsetting the footprint of a bottle that you've drunk in the past as well. And that's been the most successful launch of a product in recent years into the New Zealand market, and they're busy expanding that into other markets as well. So that's the product level of business to business. And then you have the business to consumer, or B2B2C, where a business might be selling goods online. And this is where we provide a little green button which integrates into their e-commerce store, and customers can offset at the point of sale. And that can either be a measured offset if they know the carbon footprint of those products, or if they don't, which most don't, it can just be a generic offset, so that consumers who know, hey, I've got a bit of a carbon footprint problem. Every time I'm buying something online, I'm contributing to it. Here's a green button I can click that does some good to point me in the right direction towards the solution rather than being part of the problem. And that's something that we can either do by custom integration, like with airlines onto their booking platforms, or airports through their Wi-Fi. But it's also something that we've got plugins from Magento, WooCommerce, and Shopify that they can simply turn on in their stores.
Oh, wow. That's really cool. So I'm just at checkout, on Shopify, and I'm, about to put in my credit card info, and I just see the little green button right there.
Yep. And you just one click. And then the beauty behind that is it doesn't distract you from the purchase, because it's just one click. But after the click happens and the purchase is completed, we actually send a transparency receipt, which is a track and trace receipt independently from CarbonClick to that client, saying, here's your offset, thanks for supporting this, here are the projects it's gone to, here's your track and trace, so you can actually see your $2 or $1, whatever the amount is, has actually reached that project, and you can learn about that project. So, and it's totally transparent and totally auditable, just like track and trace on a courier. We've done the same for carbon offsetting. Yeah,
that's really cool. And those are honestly like offsetting projects that consumers like you and me may not otherwise have access to. I wouldn't even know as a consumer how I would access an offsetting program without going through some intermediary.
Yeah. I mean, we do have subscriptions and purchase offset options on our website and that, which is incidental, but that's not really what our core focus is. It's mainly about helping businesses that have an e-commerce store, or businesses that have a product that they want to go climate friendly, or just businesses that want to stand up and help their team become more sustainable.
Yeah. What about, specifically like banking or fintech products? I mean, is there a different way that you would integrate with those products than a platform?
Yeah, absolutely. So for loyalty programs, we've got a number in the pipeline, and one that's actually gone live, which is the largest loyalty program here in New Zealand. It's called AA Smart Fuels. So this was a program that's been around for a long time, and it allows people when they're shopping at the supermarket or at the petrol station to, or a number of hundreds of retailers actually, to accumulate those points into fuel discounts. Now, they don't want to be part of the problem of encouraging people to burn more fuel. They actually want to be part of the solution and encourage people into EVs and things. So what they've done is they've partnered with CarbonClick so that the rewards can be carbon offsets as rewards. So when you're shopping, you've got an impact from your groceries that you're purchasing. You can be offsetting as you're shopping. Even when you do fill up with fuel, if you can't, you might not be able to afford an electric vehicle yet, or you might have lease remaining on your petrol vehicle to use up first. At least you can offset at the pump just by swiping your card, and your rewards, instead of being a small discount, become carbon offsets, the equivalent of your fuel purchase. So that's been really popular. We've had better than estimated uptake of that program. And then the other ones that are in the progress are with Visa and loyalty rewards programs, where at a statement level, a consumer can offset their spend. And this can be based on a law of averages. Somebody that spends 10 grand a year on their credit card has a carbon footprint of roughly 10 tonnes, and somebody that spends 20 grand has a carbon footprint of roughly 20 tonnes. So we can actually align those offsets so that instead of getting credit card rewards, you can have offsets. So just by using that as a credit card, or the green card we call it, you're actually offsetting as you spend as well. So that's something. These are really long sales cycles with traditional banks.
I bet.
So none are going to be live at least for 6 months yet with the ones we're working with. But that's certainly something I'm really excited about, and it's an opportunity to have massive impact across a large number of individuals.
Yeah, that's really cool. I think especially on the banking side. I guess, have you seen what are like the biggest challenges you see when you're working with big banks or fintech companies in terms of, how they approach the product, or even green tech, green finance for that matter?
A lot of it is still very old-fashioned. So there might be some mover shakers in the organisation, but those mover shakers are still battling a process internally which takes a long time to get change across the line. And this is where neobanks are starting to pop up and do really, really well, because they can act in a very agile manner like a startup can. They're still regulated, they still have to abide by certain rules, but with things like carbon offsets as a reward program, they can literally spool this up over a number of months rather than over a number of years. And I think, again, for the younger generations in particular, they'll be talking with their wallets. And if the neobanks get out with this technology faster than the main banks, it'll be the demise of some of these more institutional banks that are there and relying on customers not migrating away from them because they've been with them for 40 years.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I mean, and this is assuming that the customer base is really keen on having an offsetting product, and we've talked about, right? That's like a core.
Absolutely, and there are already some cards out of Sweden. I forget which bank it is off the top of my head, but there are banks like there's the carbon card already there, which is a measurement tool that limits your spend based on carbon footprint, based on merchant category code. Again, it's based on a law of gross averages, but this is the technology and the direction that people are heading in, and they've had huge uptake in that card versus other new cards to the market.
Yeah, yeah. Well, so, I think there are probably still some skeptics out there that would say that FinTech is actually still at odds with your little green button, right? A lot of payments providers, payments FinTechs, their whole mission is around reducing transaction costs or reducing the cost of engaging in the financial system. But CarbonClick is effectively saying, let's increase the transaction costs, asking people to pay a little bit more, obviously for a good cause. But do you find that FinTech providers challenge that? What's in it for FinTech providers, maybe beyond having a customer base that is inherently motivated to save the planet?
The advantage from them is it's another add-on that their customer can select or not select. So it's another string to their bow. So if we took a company like Afterpay, for example, and they said, hey, look, we're now offering carbon offsets at our checkout through a little green button. This is just an option when the vendor's setting up the Afterpay account. They can toggle that on. Yes, I'd like to include a carbon offset option at the point of sale. And that would be something that might be a benefit that they can provide that other providers can't yet provide. So it's, I guess, an additional feature that can be offered. So then businesses that are saying, hey, look, our customers care about this. We want to reduce our footprint and we want to offer offsets to offset what we can't reduce. That's going to benefit those FinTech providers. Or we hope that's going to benefit those FinTech providers. We're actually not in dialogue with any of them just yet, but that's part of our strategy moving forward.
Got it. There's a question actually in the chat, a couple questions from Kevin. Have any companies decided to make CarbonClick opt out instead of opt in for their customers?
I love this question. We've actually been toying with this with a fairly significant sized company that in the US that's just come to us, and they've said, look, we're not entirely sure whether there are legal implications with this or not, but we want to make this an opt-out rather than an opt-in and lead the way. It's a logistics company that has a freight product at the point of sale for selecting shipping options. And they want to offer offsets at that point. So I'm pretty excited to see where that could go. Given that the actual vendor is not benefiting from this, the vendor is just enabling it for their market. It should be something that gets around any legal implications of making it an opt-out, because the vendor's not actually benefiting from it. The vendor's just trying to contribute to the solution of climate change. And I don't think we'll see any issues with that, but we're pending legal advice on that right now.
Yeah, that's really cool. And it sort of, that means the whole company is like actually making a stance, not necessarily up to the customer. It's really, there's probably a little bit of shame involved there if you're going to opt out, right?
Yeah, that's right. And you can't simply put an opt-out button if that company is doing nothing itself. Like, that company has to be able to say, hey, here's what we're doing to reduce our footprint, and here's our plan for the future to bring it to zero over 10 years. But here's what you can do to offset what we haven't yet been able to reduce competitively. And there's just a button that you can, or here's the button that we've selected for you. If you don't want to do this, then just click opt out. And then you get this thing like, oh shit, this company that I'm working with is already doing all these cool things. There is still a footprint. We don't have electric ships yet. We don't have electric planes yet delivering my goods. I know I have a carbon footprint if I want that pair of jeans. So yes, I can do my part as well.
Creates like a virtuous cycle. The customer vendor, everyone continues to do their part. So that's a really nice way of putting it. There's one more question from Kevin here. Does CarbonClick plan to integrate with physical point of sale systems? In the US, it is common for some POS terminals to prompt a consumer to donate a small amount to charity. I think this is, I see this in Singapore for sure. Yeah, how does it integrate with physical POS?
Yeah, so we've spoken with with Vend, and we're looking at POS systems like Toast, which are new systems rather than the old terminal type systems. But we do actually have a prototype terminal as well, which we've put together for some testing in New Zealand, just to get that market feedback and start collecting that data. Problem with the physical terminals is that there are so many models there, and they cost so much to actually build the application for each model. Even though our back end stays the same, it's a slow and expensive process to cover all of the models that we would need. We may be able to do this with a retailer like McDonald's, for example, where we could run this across, where they've got consistency of terminals across all of their chains. And then it might be economically viable, but it's certainly something that we're looking at. And then the more electronic servers, the Vens and Toasts of the world, would make good sense for us in that space, yes.
Yeah. This is leading me to think about, some of the other physical challenges, especially that we see in Southeast Asia, where we have many more like cash-based economies. If someone is living in a cash-based economy, what are the opportunities there for someone to contribute to carbon offsetting?
The opportunities there come into the product level. So if the business is building offsets into the products, it's really difficult at a cash level because we have no control over the traceability and the reporting.
Right.
And that's what we're founded on. The fact that we're moving more and more electronic gives us that opportunity to build trust and transparency to carbon offsets. So I can't see a world where we would be able to offer that in the cash economy.
Got it. So the faster that FinTech moves, the faster that green FinTech can move.
That's right. Absolutely.
Got it. Well, Dave, let's maybe zoom out a little bit, kind of going back to that point around kind of the macro level around what's happening in Australia, New Zealand, and then Southeast Asia. Southeast Asia, I live in Singapore, but Southeast Asia generally is quite nascent in the green FinTech space. Some countries, we were talking before, like the Philippines and Indonesia, have been lauded as leaders in green finance due to major investments in sustainable projects. Other countries are just beginning to focus on green finance, mostly through like central bank policies and incentives. In Singapore, where I am now, the government, MAS, as we talked about a little bit before, they are taking a number of steps to promote green finance. Just to rattle off a few here for our audience, in 2019, they announced a green finance action plan. There's a subcommittee that works on this as part of MAS. There's something called Project Greenprint. More recently, MAS announced a global FinTech Hackcelerator, which is, I think, like a hackathon in partnership with Oliver Wyman. And even in the Singapore FinTech Fest in 2020, Ravi Menon and a number of others spoke about green finance, especially creating an Asian carbon credit marketplace. So there's, I think in Singapore particularly, there's tons of opportunities for organizations that have green use cases or investment opportunities, even research, but there's still a long way for Southeast Asia to go. And as we talked about earlier, my impression of Australia and New Zealand particularly, is that, those countries are really advanced when it comes to green finance. Can you tell us about some of the government programs or even just culture and attitudes that really help people prioritize green tech and green finance?
Yeah. So New Zealand, I guess, as a nation, is probably similar in our average attitude towards environmental concerns as nations like Canada, and we certainly are reflected in our government and the actions that our government are taking in this space as well. For example, New Zealand is the first country in the world that the government has a policy implementation to report greenhouse gas impact in investments. So they have to report on, or all financial organisations have to disclose and take action on climate-related risks. So if you're a bank and you're banking a big organisation, maybe an agro sector organisation, where you've got a huge carbon footprint from the beef and dairy industry, for example, you've got to report that. So people investing in that bank are disclosed, hey, this is where the bank is spending its money. So that has a flow-on effect of the bank having to ask for reporting from everybody that's invested in or lent money into, which in turn drives change, because it drives an underlying requirement once you start reporting to actually have to start reducing as well, especially when that report that these financial institutions are required to make doesn't look rosy. Mm-hmm. So that's something that I hope other governments around the world will implement as well. So these are most financial institutions, most listed issuers have to report on emissions factors, climate-related risks. All registered banks have to, and even managers of investment schemes have to. So we have something KiwiSaver, which is like the pension scheme. But they all have to report on this now, and this is driving big change in New Zealand. So I've got a lot of hope that this will be reflected in other countries around the world shortly as well. Yeah.
What about, the risk of greenwashing? I think greenwashing, maybe you can explain this better than I can, but basically trying to say that something is green or sustainably sourced or there's sustainable impact, but in fact, it's just a nice PR. Do you see that as a risk, having all of these reporting policies?
Yeah, absolutely, I do. And this is something that's not a problem that's new. Neither is it a problem that's going to go away in the future. And this is where we saw the need for that real transparency and deep traceability behind any good that's being done. Okay, let's prove it. Because even in the carbon offsetting world, there are good quality offsets and there are really poor quality offsets that are probably going to, you've seen Bloomberg reporting a few weeks back on one of the biggest carbon offset schemes in the US, which was a conservation of forest project, which was actually put into conservation 6 years earlier. And they've kind of double dipped by saying, hey, we're now going to covenant this area that was already earmarked to conservation. Would that forest have been harvested and cut down? I don't think so. So that becomes a bit of double dipping, and that's just the carbon offset version of this. But other companies that are either just purchasing offsets or just doing something small to say that they're environmentally sustainable, they're getting pulled over the coals for this. You look at big brands like H&M. I don't know if you've seen any of the Hassan Minhaj series on Netflix, but if they spend 15% or so of their marketing budget on talking about how green they are, and they spend less than 1% of their actual budget on greenification, that's greenwashing, and they've been called out for it. Other businesses might get away with it because they might spend 7 or 8% of their budget on greenification and 15% of their marketing budget telling the story about it. That's not so bad. But customers can see through it, and when you start taking the mickey, you start getting that backlash, and it's deserved backlash as well.
Yeah. How, as a consumer who cares about, saving the environment and wants to, work with companies that are legitimately, furthering the goal of climate change or stopping climate change, How would you know? Like, what is there like a threshold? Are there some key metrics that consumers could look for to say, okay, this company is just greenwashing and this company is actually holding itself to a much higher standard?
Yeah, I think certifications are quite a good one to look for. And the problem with some certifications even is that they're just a stamp. You look at the medals in the wine industry, for example, that are sponsored by the vineyard that gives itself medals. There's nothing to stop that happening in the wider world. But if you dig a little deeper and understand your products, they generally will speak for themselves when you look at the ingredient list on a packet or how much plastic packaging is involved in something that's supposedly from an environmentally sustainable company. If they can tell the story about, clothing and the dyes that they use and even cotton, even organic cotton, have they done it using child labour, or have they got, some sort of trade aid certification behind them, or at least a story that stacks up. Most decent sized organisations can't get away with greenwashing for too long. So reputable brands that have reputable stories and have backup, they don't have people challenging that, that's usually a pretty good sign.
Yeah, got it. Well, so speaking of, there's a question from the audience as well, which is, is there an easy way to see which merchants are using CarbonClick? As a consumer interested in carbon offsetting, it would be great to start from a list of merchants who I know offer this feature. Again, sounds like another consumer who wants to be responsible with their spending.
Yeah, actually, I'm glad you asked that, because we've been trying to validate this consumer marketplace. We do have it to a small degree, but it's not very well structured and it's not brought to the front and spotlighted through our website. But we do have a list of our merchants there. There's about 700 of them. But what we need to do next is make it easy for you. Have a look at people in your area or sort by types of products that you want to be shopping for.
That's great. I'm definitely looking forward to seeing that as well. Dave, we only have a few minutes left, and I don't see any more questions from the audience. So I've been wanting to ask you this question since before we started, and it's a little bit irrelevant to CarbonClick, but I wanted to ask, you actually started your career as a pilot. So I was wondering if there's anything from your piloting experience that you either use today as you're running CarbonClick or kind of influenced your journey to get there.
Yeah, I was a total petrol head, aviation nut. I used to race and I used to fly planes and helicopters. And it was handy in business when I started investing in buying and selling businesses, because I could fly myself all over the place without really any awareness of the carbon footprint behind it. To me, pollution was how clean an engine was running rather than how much CO2 was coming out of it. So the learnings from there, though, I was always looking for pollution reductions. And I was also looking for ways to gain efficiencies, use less fuel, and basically take better flight routes or phase in better so that I'd be in a glide longer instead of sitting in a holding pattern at the other end by phasing in with controllers and things. So I was able to operate on probably about 15 to 20% less fuel than most pilots were operating on.
Wow, that's significant.
Yeah, oh, absolutely. And when I was a business owner, it was about cost savings more than anything. But you're able to, through planning ahead and thinking ahead and being a proactive pilot, you're able to achieve quite decent savings. And I saw this as an opportunity for airlines as well. If there's going to be a 15-minute hold in the queue to take off, why do you need to fire up 4 engines, for example? You only need, one engine on a 4-engine aircraft to be powering you on the ground. You can fire up the other 3 2 minutes before takeoff and save maybe 4 or 5 tons of fuel. There's simple things like that, and planning for the descents and things. a little bit of planning and thinking about fuel management could actually have a major impact on our environment. And I know it's still a number of years away before we have electric propulsion or hydrogen propulsion, but I am still an engineering nut, an aviation nut, and I can't wait for the day where I can fly to visit all my favourite people and places without having any impact on the environment. But for now, I can offset what I can't reduce, and that's all that we can do right now.
Yeah, Dave, that is a fascinating story. It is wild to think about. Yeah, because I think a lot of people think that the number one place where they are making a really terrible carbon impact is through flying, and the fact that you came from there and it really influenced your journey to get to the space is extremely inspiring. Last question, we're almost out of time. Last question is, what can audience members do to support you and the CarbonClick mission?
I think the biggest thing is if you could just subscribe to our newsletter, and if you want to offset your life, we have subscriptions available that you can sign up to, even if it's just if you sign up and then leave again just to view that process. We'd love feedback. User experience feedback is really valuable for us. And, you know, if you fall in love with those projects and things, what is it that most connects you to those projects so that we can help build that better for more people in the future? That would probably be the first thing that you could do. And the second thing is, when you're shopping online, if you can submit feedback to that store, hey, we'd love to be able to offset our carbon footprint, could you consider CarbonClick?
Awesome. Dave, thank you so much. I think we're out of time for today, but this has been a fascinating conversation. And I am really excited to see where you and CarbonClick go in this space. Thank you so much for being here. Thank you to our audience, and yeah, have a great Friday and a great weekend, everyone.
Thanks so much for having me.
All right, take care, everyone. Bye-bye.